Welcome everyone, good morning. This session for Access All Areas 2021 is specifically focusing on our access screening product and taking a look at how we've assisted some of our customers to cut their turnaround times by over 50% by using this tool. So this is me. I've worked in recruitment for 10+ years now, and I spend most of my time just dealing with our customers and looking at their onboarding processes just to see how we can streamline those, see how we can make their operational processes a bit more effective around the whole onboarding and vetting process. So there is a questions function or a questions panel on here. If you do have any questions, please put them in that panel. I am showing parts of the software, so what I'll endeavour to do is actually answer those questions whilst showing you some of the product this morning. If there are any other questions that I can't answer during the session, then there is a question section right at the end where we can try and cover the rest of them that we haven't managed to go through during the demonstration. So just to give a brief overview of what to expect from this session. So the allotted time, I think, is 1 hour and 15 minutes. We'll probably set to run for an hour, maybe give you 15 minutes before we jump on the next session back. Key to today really is just to really show you the screening product and why it's so relevant in the current climate. Then we're going to walk through keeping up to date with the changing compliance, with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. There's a lot of changes out there in terms of the expectations of clients and regulators and legislation around compliance. Maybe some of the effects of not doing this correctly. I'm then going to actually walk through the automated screening process and how people have added technology into what might be a manually operational process in a lot of businesses, and then go through some of the case studies and testimonials of our clients who've seen this huge reduction in turnaround times of over 50% and also saved 40% plus of their administrative cost and time by putting this product into place. So that's the running order. I'll talk a little bit more at the end about the actual return on investment that our customers have seen from the product, and anything, as I said earlier, that I haven't covered in the questions and answers, I'll cover in that section. There is a handout tab that you'll see on your screens as well. Now within that, we've shared some further information about screening as a product. And we've also shared the case studies within there as well. So if you open up the handouts tab at any point, you'll be able to access some of those case studies and documents that we might reference during this session. Okay, so why screening? Why now? It is more relevant than ever in the current climate. So with the changing legislation that comes into place, the changing around how regulators want to enforce compliance, particularly around COVID, means that you need to keep up to speed with this. So things like fast-track DBS processes, changing in the way that you can run the right to work process. These are all changes that have come into force during the pandemic. Now, a lot of situations like this really expedite change. So we were seeing a lot of trends within recruitment and onboarding practices move more towards automation and technology anyway. So this was coming, but with COVID and with the pandemic coming in, it's really expedited that change. So it's quite important at the moment just to keep abreast and up to speed of actually what's happening in the world and trying to adapt your processes to do that. So one feature of our particular tool that's very relevant for that at the moment is that you can collect and validate documents remotely through the system. So we'll show a bit of that in the demonstration later on in the process. But at the moment, more so than ever, people are at home, they're not coming into your office, you need to give them a good candidate experience, and everybody is almost, even technophobes are having to get used to joining online sessions like this, going on Teams calls, using portal links to provide information and documentation, where they might not have been used to in the past. So again, the process of a lot of this automation was coming anyway, but particularly during this pandemic period, the adoption of this sort of technology has almost become obligatory, because people have to communicate. You still need to communicate with your candidates, your clients. You still need to collect documents, validate documents in the onboarding process. So it's been necessary for a lot of people to embrace this type of process, and we've helped a lot of businesses with their sort of business continuity plans by just remaining operational and able to work remotely. Now Brexit's here now. It's sort of creeped up on us out of nowhere during all the sort of storm of the pandemic, but there's been a lot of changes to the to how visas work and the points-based system. So again, it's difficult to keep abreast of that and train your whole team and your whole business on what that legislation is. So something like a screening tool like Access Screening will just constantly notify you of that change in legislation. It will tell you what features are in the system to help you to determine the right to work of a candidate, or walk people through that process of just vetting them and onboarding them against current guidelines within this changing climate. So there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand coming out of lockdown. So as you would anticipate, certain sectors are going to start booming again. Things like hospitality, where everyone, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call, as am I, are quite keen to get back to the pubs and restaurants when we can. There's going to be a lot of pent-up demand in various different sectors post this. So many businesses need to have a scalable process in place, and a lot of our clients are putting this technology in so they can deal with that pent-up demand that's coming post us all being allowed out of the house, hopefully very soon. And also there's tougher compliance guidelines. So a lot of your clients, a lot of the regulators, a lot of legislation is changing for compliance to become a lot more detailed, and that is ever changing. So you need an adaptable and scalable solution to be able to keep complying to those guidelines that are out there. So that sort of leads me on to the sort of point again at the moment, is that, you know, there is a lot of changes in compliance. One in particular that we're noticing from a lot of our medical agencies is that many companies now are having to perform MRZ code checks who are on NHS supplier frameworks. So this is the facility that helps you to check for a fraudulent passport document. So things like this slowly but surely start to come into different frameworks. It's not just in NHS, we're starting to see it in areas like care and CQC standards, whether it's CCS for NHS or education. Different checks are starting to become more commonplace and actually mandatory in some of these frameworks. So having a solution like ours, where you have something like an integrated MRZ checking facility, which can automatically check if a passport has been flagged as a fraudulent document in the past, and actually doing that alongside capturing references, doing DBS checks, doing other medical and data checks all in one place, is where a lot of our customers are actually seeing their return on investment, because they're able just to improve their operational process and stay compliant to their frameworks, but at the same time get the candidate through the process quickly and give them a really good experience along the way. So it's really important just to keep up to date with changing compliance, and again, a tool like ours can really help with that. So how can it affect your brand and reputation? And this is just a handful of articles that we've put up here. Now, obviously there's fines in place for not adhering to right to work guidelines. So you know, we all know that there is a risk in terms of fines and actual monetary implications of not doing this correctly. But above and beyond that, you know, we want to protect people, we want to protect businesses, and you want to protect your brand and reputation. So if you are providing workers, you need to be making sure that they're compliant and going through the right process, or even going above and beyond the right process, just to make sure that you're compliant to the standards that you need to, and placing people who are going to be a benefit to your clients and not cause any issues. So some prime examples here, and the one on the right in particular at the moment is just how important this process is. So the vaccination program, this was an article actually that was in the Daily Mail showing that there was a big issue around how long it was taking to vet the vaccinators and how many checks they had to do. Now, almost ironically, the picture in the Daily Mail was actually a picture of our system. Now, the key to this was that we worked with this customer to actually then say, well, look, what are the guidelines that you need to follow to actually get these workers through? What regulations do you have to follow to that? Are you doing things above and beyond that that aren't necessary, and building up this process so it's too many checks? So what we did is work again with this customer to actually streamline the process, to start vetting the vaccinated and different workers that they were dealing with as well, to say, well, look, we need to streamline this to get people through this process a lot quicker. So I think the key here is that this is very important at the moment. It runs across multiple sectors at the moment. NHS is obviously very, very, very busy and very compliant, but as the pent-up demand progresses in different sectors, it's really key that you're thinking about how you can start adding automation in to improve your time to hire and get people through this process, both quickly, but also adhering to your framework and compliance guidelines. So this diagram that you can see on the page now really shows you how some of our clients have added that automation into their existing screening process. Now, this can vary client to client, and this is just sort of a broad example to show you where some of the tools might fit in. So the majority of the people at the moment might apply for a role through a job board or apply directly to your website. There may well have been a point where they came into your office and actually interviewed and provide some documentation to you, which you could have then collected and started to either add that onto a portal like ours or use the Right to Work Act, for example, to walk through that process. That process might now happen over video interview. Instead of meeting someone right face to face and doing a Right to Work check on a mobile app, you'll more than likely be sending them a branded portal link out over email in advance of you doing a video call and starting to collect their documentation and doing their references and asking them questions on a portal that may also be sort of a precursor to what you're going to ask them in sort of an initial interview or vetting process. So at that point, candidates tend to be then offered a role subject to their actual background checks. Again, you could then be sending them a branded portal link out that gives you the possibility of actually gaining consent from them for their data to be used to actually run checks. So you might be running background checks depending on what sector you're working in. It could be credit checks or DVLA checks or medical data pin checks or anything that you require for that particular role. But with a screening tool like this, you can send the portal link out to the candidate. They're providing you with this information, and automatically the system is checking that and providing you that answer for you to validate to say you're happy with those responses. And then you can start monitoring the progress of that, monitor the ongoing compliance. You can share reports within your business, share your reports to your clients if you're on the recruitment agency side, and actually really then start to collate vetting packs automatically as well. So at every point in the recruitment life cycle of getting someone through the onboarding process, you can add technology just to improve that process step by step. So here's some case studies of some businesses that we've dealt with where we've had a real success. So we've implemented the product recently into Rullion. Now, Rullion, quite a large recruitment business for those who aren't familiar with it. A big part of them joining us was to try to help them to create a much more robust and effective screening process. They wanted to try and reduce their turnaround time. They wanted to give better experience to their candidates, and they wanted to offer a wider service to their customers. So one of the key parts of this project was really just scoping with them what they did manually currently, where they had disparate systems in place, and just fitting that into exactly how the screening tool could help them to improve that process. So we actually managed to reduce the turnaround time for onboarding for them from 3 weeks to an average of 7 days. So it's a big time saver in terms of the actual resource they had in their business that were manually checking references and trying to upload documents, putting vetting packs together to actually come to this stage. So for Rullion in particular, one of the key things for them as well was how configurable the system was. So a lot of their customers had different requirements coming through and changing quite regularly. Now, what was happening was that they weren't really adaptable enough to change to those. They couldn't rebrand their portals, they couldn't change the types of checks they were asking for their candidates, where when we put screening into play here, they were able to actually start immediately configuring workflows within 1 or 2 minutes and resending portal links out to their clients and going and winning new business off the back of having that robust screening process in place. So one of the key factors for them in actually reducing their turnaround time, and actually one of the key benefits of them winning more customers and improving their operational efficiency, was just how configurable the system actually is. That was a good example in the recruitment agency space of how our customers have benefited. And I've got 2 examples here, and both of these are on the case studies in the handouts, as I've mentioned, for you to go through in more detail. But we're doing a lot of work at the moment in the care sector. So we have Premier Care and also Outlook Care. Now, very similar stories with these businesses. Both had very manual processes in place. They were finding that it was taking a long time to actually vet people. So Premier Care, it was taking over 2 weeks to actually get people through that onboarding process. They were finding what happened was, as they got busy, more and more errors were coming into play, and they just had multiple systems. And that was giving different candidate experiences for different parts of the process. So what they really wanted to do was try and consolidate all of that by using the screening tool to automate some of the process, try and reduce that time to hire down, which they did. I think they got it from 2 weeks down to about 4 weeks. And they did it to just try and help them to adhere to their CQC guidelines. So again, a lot of these businesses that are working on frameworks are really using this to help put workflows together to not only make it quicker, but just make sure they're doing the right thing and they've got a full audit trail on that process. And Outlook Care was a very, very similar story as well. And I think the key for Outlook Care is that they didn't really have any central record recording all of this information. So they also had quite manual processes. I think some of their onboarding process took around 10 weeks or so. So it was very long-winded in terms of what they were doing. By putting this automation in place, they managed to just get a lot more efficiency around vetting candidates and putting them through that process. So we work in multiple sectors, whether it's on the agency side, whether it's on the corporate side, and you're dealing with highly compliant areas, but we also have a lot of customers who just need to put through very basic compliance processes very quickly. But the configurability of the system just allows you just to have multiple workflows just to suit those particular practices and the differences between your clients. Okay, so what does that look like in practice? So what I'm going to do now is actually just sort of walk you through some of their workflows and some of the automation that they've put in place. So you can actually see in practice how the system works and how they've benefited from it. So I'm actually going to start off within my emails. So basically at any point in the hiring process, you can send a branded link, much like this one on the screen, straight out to the candidate for them to start walking through that compliance process. So they can, or you as a client can brand up the logos, the coloration, the wording in here. Candidate clicks on this link. If you want to have two-factor authentication set up, you can have that set up on here. Just type in the code. You don't have to have this step in. And at this point, you can actually then put privacy agreements in place, GDPR. You can actually get consent for running different checks. Again, this can be tailored depending on what you want from the candidate. It gives you a lot of flexibility to get some agreement from them up front about the actual compliance process they're about to go through. So Peter is a candidate, then it's a very straightforward workflow, as we call it, this 1 to 9 on the left-hand side to start working through. Again, the logos, what we're actually asking for, the wording within here, you can change. And it's a very easy candidate experience. So this product's actually within the recruitment division is integrated into our CRM system. So you can actually pre-populate this and trigger these emails to go straight out from the CRM system, or in a standalone world of screening, you can just send this link straight from the screening platform. So Peter's just going to work through this. We make it very straightforward for them to provide us with information. So really clear timelines. So here's a gap in a timeline that we're asking you to fulfill 5 years worth of address history. It's red, so it's unsatisfied because he hasn't filled that in. If the candidate goes in and actually just fills that address in, so it's very visual, it just shows them that they've completed that task. Turns green and they satisfied that requirement. So references then works in exactly the same way. And this is probably one of the key areas on the system where a lot of our customers are saving a huge amount of time and a huge amount of their administrative cost. So I've got a big timeline here as a candidate to say, I'm looking for you to provide me with 5 years worth of employment references. Candidate can go in, provide you with those details, and then start filling up that timeline. Now, if the candidate left a gap of over 30 days or 28 days, whatever you stipulate is necessary to cover, the system will automatically say, well, look, what were you doing during that period? You have this gap, you need to provide an activity claim against it. And the candidate can then go through and actually provide that activity claim. So the back and forth of someone manually having that conversation, sending separate emails, then it being a difficult task to actually monitor the audit trail, bring together a vetting pack, actually get someone through that compliance process becomes quite an arduous task. But if you put this in place, and many of our customers who put this in place have seen such a big turnaround in terms of how references get done and how quickly they can do them, that it just frees up that person's time to do something else. Or if they're looking to double in scale as a business, they're not having to add in extra headcount to do things like references and do these administrative processes that the system can just pick up for them. So once the candidate's filled in this information, the system will just send off a fully branded link like this straight out to the referee, and the system can actually chase both sides to collect that reference information. Questions part, quite a powerful part of the tool. Some people use it in just basic form just to ask pretty straightforward questions. It can be much more sophisticated than that though, where you can ask them multiple choice questions. You can have conditional questions, whereas if I put yes to this, it may then ask me for further information. So questions is quite a useful tool to maybe break down almost sort of a registration form process. And documentation is really powerful on the system as well. So you can start providing documents out to candidates. So please download this employee handbook. It could be a health and safety notice, could be a terms of business or something they just need to acknowledge. So they can download that document, tick to acknowledge, and again, it's going to give you an audit trail on everything that the candidate's doing. So 2 or 3 other ways to deal with documents. You can start requesting documents from candidates. So it's a responsive web page. Candidate could be on a mobile phone. They could be taking pictures of a driving license, insurance certificate, whatever document it is you need to collect, and uploading those into the system here. And also there's a direct integration that we have in here into DocuSign. So if you did need something to be e-signed as opposed to just being acknowledged or just having something uploaded by the candidate, you can get that signed within the same portal. Now the key here is that we're doing all of this activity from one candidate experience. So it'd be branded to you as a company or as an agency. The candidate's providing you with referencing questions that might be pre-reg type questions. They're providing documentation to you. They're signing documentation. They're doing all of this in one place rather than having to go off to disparate systems or just have a email back and forth, various phone calls, coming into the office to give paperwork. So really gives a much better candidate experience, and this is what allows us to get candidates through the process a lot quicker. Now, one thing to mention here as well, which is really useful, is if you are working in industries where you are requiring further compliance checks to take place, like credit checks or driving license checks or DBS checks, if I've set up the system to actually check that on this particular workflow, it would just ask the points that are necessary to do a credit check. It would ask that as a question on the portal. The candidate would provide that. As soon as this is submitted back, a credit check will automatically be done. If Peter needed to go through a DBS process, if I'd filled in the portal here, third-party checks box would just pop up, and Peter would be able to go through a DBS application within the portal as well. And we're integrated into a payment system for Peter to be able to actually pay for that DBS in here too. So not only can you actually gather information and start automating references and collect documents, you can also actually work through this process to then actually do checks and perform checks and have that come through at the back end of the system for you to then validate alongside all the other information that you've put through from the candidate. Okay, so that's the candidate experience part. I think the key things to take away from this is that it's very configurable. You could have very basic workflows set up in here or very sophisticated workflows. These workflows could also be staged throughout the hiring process. So you could do a pre-registration piece, you could then do a DBS and a reference piece after that. It's up to you how you want to configure this process here, the workflow, and how you want this to look, which is what we call the brands. And this is what we're using just to really make sure that we're working closely with our customers to define what workflows they need during implementation, and that they can effectively get candidates to engage with them more when we're in this remote climate and still get them through the process in a compliant way, but a lot faster than they currently are with the systems that they're using. So that's the candidate part. The other part of the system I did just want to show, just to really show you how the sort of automation is helping on more the operational side of the business when you're validating this information when it's coming back in from your candidates. So what you can see on the screen here is the screening dashboard. So if I was an operational user within your business, I might work in a HR capacity within a company, I might be an administrator within an agency, a resourcer, or you might have consultants within an agency come in here. I can have a clear view on the dashboard of everything that's going on in the portals. Something else which has been very beneficial to a lot of our organisations and clients is they're able to track expiring documents. So they can set on the system 4 weeks before a document's about to expire, it could just flag it to them on the dashboard. So they're just mitigating that risk of missing a right to work check on someone where a visa is going to expire on time, or missing any expiring documents on the system. It's just going to flag it to them, and you can email it to them as well. So this dashboard is where you can start to actually manage that process. And what happens with this is that you're starting a process of management by exception. So the candidate's provided all their information in the portal. Once they've sent it back through, it's coming back to you in the back end of the system in one page on a candidate profile. So if I just go into an example of a candidate profile here. So Peter's been through the nurse workflow. You can see the time of when it was started, when it was completed. You can have a look at SLAs on when you want to complete this, this task for this particular workflow. Now, on one page, someone is going to then validate all this information. So all the documents that Peter's provided are going to come back in the system, and they're going to come back in orange. And as you validate them, you can click on the documents, start to accept them and turn them green, and it gives you an audit trail of what you're doing. So as you're going through that, you're just systematically verifying that you're happy with all the documents that Peter's provided. If there's anything you needed to upload as a internally, you can actually also upload those documents within here and still manage it in the same place as the documentation that's come through from the candidate. All of the third-party checks as well will come straight in here. So if we've done a credit check, you'll be able to see it's completed and click on view, and you see the result of that. You can see the results of things like MRZ code checks that we spoke about earlier that are becoming more commonplace now and more mandatory on a lot of the frameworks. So any of the third-party type checks will come up on here in the same place in one page, alongside the references, alongside all the other information that's coming back into the system and questions, etc. Now, what then can happen is you can download a report. So this will then bring it together either as a summary that you may well have to provide. If you're a recruitment agency, you might have to provide this to your customers. It's just a summary of a vetting and compliance pack. or actually you can download all of this documentation into one place. So this can then be fed into other systems. You can save the file into your different CRM systems. If you have Access Recruitment CRM, what will happen is once you've validated this information, it will actually map back into the fields in AR CRM. Now, what that allows a lot of our agencies to do, which is very useful for them, is to set up a compliance requirement for each job type within their CRM, to say that for every nurse, we have to have at least a DBS check and the other checks that they need for that particular role type. If the candidate doesn't have that, I don't want my consultants to be able to place that person in a role. And there's admin rights around, you know, how controlled you use that and how flexible you are with it. But effectively what it does then is, if I went to place Peter in Access Recruitment CRM, it would flag to me on the screen in CRM, you can't place Peter in this role because he doesn't have a live DBS, he doesn't have a current right to work document. Now, all CRM is doing is calling screening and saying, look, what documents does this person have for that particular workflow that they need to be compliant for? And it just is then going to flag to you what's missing. So it gives you that control of making sure that you've got the relevant documentation and up-to-date documentation. And that's just at a consultant level. So the consultant's not having to go and talk to a compliance person within the business, not having to sort of back and forth on emails, back and forth on phone calls. So operationally, when people are putting this in place, it's actually just improving the internal process of communication as well, because the systems are talking to each other. It's taking out that manual process of having to relay information either by uploading it onto a system or having these back and forth conversations or emails where people are desperately trying to get people through the process as quickly as they can. So again, that's just another point of how this part of the process is helping to sort of streamline that administrative task. So you can do things like log actions in here, assign tasks to other users within the system. Now, once Peter's gone through this validation process, again, it's quite visual. It will turn everything green and say this is a compliant worker, and then you'll just be managing by exception for Peter. So if Peter ever needed to work on or provide a new right to work document, 4 weeks before that document was about to expire, it would just flag it to you on the dashboard here, or actually email to you. Or if you had AR CRM, the Access Recruitment CRM, it would flag that up to the consultant in the CRM as well. So that's the process of validating that particular check, and that's where a lot of the sort of benefits are coming in terms of reduced admin time and improving candidate turnaround times. Now, one area just to show you as well on the system while we're here, is how this is all configured. So you can actually configure this by adding different brands on the system, adding in all your different document types. But what underlies each brand basically is what logos does it have, what colors do we want on that particular brand, and also what underlies that is what workflows do you need. So as I said in the candidate portal here, this 1 to 9 is what we're calling a workflow. So Peter might be going through a nurse workflow here, or a locum doctor workflow. It might just be a site worker, an industrial or a financial services worker. You can have different workflows set up for different job types or different sectors, or however you want. You can set up as many workflows as you need in here. The key thing, and this was one of the best bits of feedback we had from Rullion and numerous other agencies, is how configurable this is. So if your client changes this requirement, once you've saved this process, you can send this out at any point to the candidate. But once they change their process, you can come in at any point and just change this workflow to say, right, now this isn't required anymore, this is required, whatever it needs to be, different types of document that might need to happen, whether you regularly need to run a HCPC check or a GMC check, and you actually want that to auto recheck every 28 days. You know, all that facility is available now to start doing things like rerunning medical data checks. So rather than your compliance or admin staff having to go on a website, type something in, take a screenshot, upload it into their desktop, save it into a file, then save it into a CRM, the candidate can just provide their PIN number within the portal, and then the system will then check that PIN, provide the result in screening, and also you can set it up so it rechecks it on whatever frequency you want it to. So we can do that for HCPC and GMC checks and various others. So if that requirement ever changes, it's as easy as that, just to actually take it off the next portal link that goes out, or the next workflow that goes out to the candidate. So all the document types you can manage. So it's very flexible for you to be able to adapt to any change, whether that's from legislation, client demand, whatever it needs to be. You can change these workflows. I won't go through all of these, but you get the sort of gist of it. You can decide how many references you work through, how often to chase the candidate, how often to chase the referee. Maybe if you want to put SLAs in that you then want to report on in the future. But once that's saved, to trigger that check to go out to the candidate, if you're just using screening standalone, so you can just use this as a standalone product, you just need to select the brand and the workflow, name and email address, and it brings you back round almost to where we started, where candidate gets an email and they fill in this email link. Now this process here of choosing a brand and a workflow, if you're working on AR CRM, these drop-down menus are just within AR CRM. So a consultant can say, right, I want to put Peter through the NMC or nursing workflow for RGN, and it will just send that workflow straight out of CRM, and the candidate will get that link, provide the details, someone validates it in here, then it sends all of that information back to the CRM. Okay. Screening has got a API as well, so if you're using different CRMs and you want that integration in place to again assist with that manual, help you with the turnaround times and operational efficiency, we can look at APIs into other CRMs as well. The last thing I wanted to show on here is product notifications. So I think one of the key things that we mentioned within this as to why screening, why now, was actually keeping abreast of change. So that might be change in legislation, it might be change in functionality that we have on the screening system, it could just be change that's occurring in general within the industry that you need to be aware of. So what's really useful on screening is that we're actually offering you that information within our notifications tab. So we'll tell you, look, this legislation's changed, it's meant that we've had to add this feature on the system, here's a notification from gov.uk in the changing process, and here's how we're working that through the system in terms of automation and how you can set that up. Whether you're going to look at a YouTube video on here, whether you're going to download a PDF or actually just read that content in here, it just gives you a central resource to be able to look at, right, what's changing, what's coming up, and how do I adapt with that with my technology. So this is just assisting you when any changes do come up, it's just presented to you in an easy form for you to make changes to the system to adhere to those. So this is what a lot of our customers are using. The case studies that we've put together, what they were very good at and in getting the most out of screening was just really working on their compliance requirements to see what was necessary from their frameworks, what was necessary from their clients, and actually cutting anything out that wasn't. It's amazing how many businesses you go to where they don't really have a set process, or they haven't reviewed their process in a number of years. So a big part of reducing the turnaround time for our current customers on this product has actually come from the sort of almost cathartic process of them saying, well, look, let's review what's necessary for us to vet people. What do our clients actually want now? Have we reviewed that policy recently? Then let's map that into a workflow and add automation in. And when they've done that, that's when they've seen this big benefit of 50% plus in terms of the candidate turnaround time. And that leads me on to talking a little bit more around some of the other items of return on investment they've seen on the product. So we've mentioned the 50% improvement in turnaround times. I've spoken a few times about the administrative savings of over 40%. I think one thing to add here is that we're going and doing case studies sometimes only 1, 2, 3 months post implementation. So for a lot of companies and a lot of boards in particular who might be looking to invest, they want to see a return on investment quite quickly. You will get that very quickly with this product. It's not something that's going to take you 6, 12, 18 months to see that sort of return on investment. So that's been really positive with our client base who've put this in place. We've talked a bit around how we can automate the referencing process. We've got some more figures on how well that goes for our current customer base on the screen there. The level of configurability we've talked about in this adapting climate and our adapting needs of our clients. That ability to be able to configure the system is really key, and helping to consolidate all your third parties into one place. So if you have disparate systems giving different candidate experience on the DBS part, to referencing, to DocuSign checks, to whatever else you're doing, you can actually just consolidate that into one place, so you don't have multiple suppliers, and actually just give a much better candidate experience as well by doing that from one piece of software. One of the key things as well that particularly recruitment agencies that I deal with have really benefited from is actually revenue generation from the tool, and the level of configurability really assists with that. So we work with a lot of our recruitment agency customers to actually set up vetting divisions within their business, or equally just demonstrate why they can have higher margins from their clients by having these extra services available. So we work very closely with them to say, well, look, why don't you actually sell this service on to your clients and use this as a revenue stream? You can go to new business meetings and show your client a brand new business portal where you're vetting people. It's all branded to that particular customer. You're showing them how you can give a candidate experience to them as your client, and how you can get them through the work, the onboarding process a lot faster than any other agency. Therefore, that's why we charge that margin, or that's why we're charging you this extra cost for the service, or that's why we're running this vetting service that we now want you to partner with us on. So not only are we looking at saving administrative time, saving on candidate turnaround time, so you can place people quicker and start recognizing revenue quicker. With this tool, we're actually revenue generating and opening up a brand new stream of revenue for a lot of businesses. So big return on investment on many levels with this that you will get very quickly, and a lot of our clients have seen that. And the other one on there that is a big factor for a lot of businesses, it's always quite painful when I talk to most people about it, is helping with the audit trail and having the ability to give read-only access to the system to be audited, or just pull down those vetting packs at any point to just give to the auditors. So this has really helped around the headache of audits with those customers as well. So I've seen a few questions come through as I have been talking. So I'll just try and work through a few of those questions now. Apologies if I can't see all of them on there. The questions function on this is quite small text. So if I miss any, I'll reach out to you directly to come back to you. So one of the questions that I've got here is, how long does it take to implement the solution? So on average, we find that the implementation time is 4 weeks. Now, this is a hosted system, so it's all hosted on Amazon Web Services. It's quite easy to turn the system on and very straightforward, ready to go. We say take 4 weeks because you want to configure your workflows correctly and do at least 2 weeks of user acceptance testing. So I think the key is just making sure you get this right, and that's where you'll get the most value out of it. But the technology is very easy and straightforward to implement. So this doesn't take a huge amount of project resource or IT resource. The bulk of the implementation process is actually done by the operational users. So people who are putting together your compliance workflows, whether it's administrative tasks or operational teams, all of that can be done by that team to implement this product. It's not a big, heavy implementation that has a huge involvement from projects and IT very often. And 4 weeks is the average time to do that. And that might be with very large agencies as well as smaller agencies. Because of the level of configurability on the system, we can work this across different scales of businesses very easily. Whether you have a small business that's just looking for quick turnaround on very straightforward compliance processes, or where you get a huge amount of benefit from this if you're a bigger agency and you work in a very compliant industry, it's still very suited to both of those parts. But even if you do have a big agency, a multiple group function, you can still set this up very effectively within 4 weeks and start realizing that return on investment very quickly. Someone else mentioned here about can we tailor it to different sectors? So yeah, I mean, within the system, I talked through a bit about the configurability. Now you can actually, within the brands, you might have different brands for different sectors you operate in. So if Access was a recruitment agency, I might have Access Construction as a certain brand. I could have Access Legal as a brand, Access Medical as a brand. I could set those up with different logos, different wording, a different feel to the workflow, a different feel to the text, just to suit that particular sector. So you can do that within the brands function, or equally, you might just want to keep the brand as your business and just set up multiple workflows. So you might have workflow A, which is a very straightforward process that just collects some right to work documentation, asks you a few questions and does references. And then you might have workflow B that's much more sophisticated than that, where you're collecting references, collecting documents, doing a DBS check. So you can have as many of those workflows as you want. In the section where I went into the configuration, it shows you how easy it is if you're working in multiple sectors to be able to do that. So let's just see if we can see any others. So someone's mentioned about reporting on the system. So yeah, there's a standard set of reports on the system. Screening's very good at actually just presenting you with information anyway, without having to run a report. Okay, because you're working on a management by exception process, it's almost like you now don't need to run that spreadsheet. You don't need to run that report because you will just be warned when a document's going to expire. So it does that management by exception very well, but it also presents you with data in the dashboards and in the tabs without you having to run a report. If you want to run a report, there are still standard reports in there where you can start looking at all expiring documents and filter it by date type, filter it by document type. So there is a set of standard reports in there. Also, if you're integrating it and you're using AR CRM, you could then start reporting on your CRM, or what I tend to sort of refer to as like front office data to do with the candidates, and report that against the back office data as well from screening. So there's a lot of quite good functionality in reporting in CRM where you can bring these together. But also you can run a lot of standard reports on the things that you need around this anyway. Someone else has asked, is it going to be a recording of the webinar? So yeah, the webinar is recorded. I believe that the team send out a link straight after this, or within the next few days, with access to the recording. And obviously they've got the handouts as well within the system here that you can jump on and download those. Or someone lost Wi-Fi, that's probably why they need that as a recording. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm just trying to look at any other questions I've got here. Seems to be, for some reason today, in the smallest text possible as well, which is why I'm squinting. Okay, yeah, so someone's asked, do we actually need to have a relationship with a third-party supplier to do DBS? So no is the answer to that. We hold those relationships with the third parties. So if you're doing things like MRZ code checks on passports, credit checks, DBS checks, driver checks, medical data checks, all of those are third-party relationships that we have. And in simple terms, you will just use the system. Those checks are available to you. And if you use that check, you will be charged for that particular use of the check. But that's probably one of the big benefits of the system, is that you don't have to have those multiple third parties anymore. So what that gives is a standard candidate experience, no matter what part of the compliance process they're working on. But also it means it's a lot easier for you because you're just automating it into one place and getting one invoice rather than having to work with multiple suppliers. Cool. I think that's the majority of questions. Now, what I would say is, if anybody thinks of anything afterwards or watches the recording back and thinks, I wasn't quite sure about any element of this, please do just drop me a line. My details are on here, my mobile, my email address, my LinkedIn. So just drop me a connection on there, drop me an email. If you've got specific questions, I don't mind just fielding them and answering them on a phone call. If you want a session that's more detailed and sort of tailored specifically to your business, I can do that within 30, 45 minute session. I can give you, again, a sort of abridged version of this that's tailored to your particular company. So please reach out to me for that. Download the handouts as well. A recording will be sent around. And if you have any issues with receiving recordings or anything, just drop me a line, and I'll be able to help with that. That's no problem at all. So without further ado, I have the honour of also pointing you towards the next session, which is going to be hosted by my colleague Adam Pogle, and he's going to be walking through, I think this is at 11:30. Now, one of our team, I think, has just dropped the link for this into the chat function on here. So what Adam's going to be talking about is our brilliant website tool, which a lot of you, I'm sure, in the industry of recruitment will have heard of, which is Volcanic. And he's going to talk through how this is integrating into our recruitment CRM. So that's going to be a really good session that I would advise you to click on the link in the chat and sign up to. Because that is really changing away, and Volcanic as a business have really changed the way that they are delivering websites into this sector. So it's a really, really useful tool. So if that isn't something that you've looked at in the past, it's definitely worth having a look at that as a product and joining that session with Adam at 11:30. Brilliant. Well, thanks for all your time. Best of luck to everybody. If there is anything that anybody does want to ask me directly or wants to book in a further session with me, please do let me know. Again, I think John's added a link in the chat to actually book a demo as well. So if you wanted a further demonstration on screening, look in the chat function on here, click on that link, and you can actually book in a further session with us directly. And yeah, I look forward to speaking to all of you soon. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.